You know what time it is. Get into it! Get into it, darlings. It is story time with Chris. How we doing? That's a bit better. Now I can see myself a little bit more. Hopefully y'all can see me. I thought my camera was a little foggy. It's just my lighting. My apologies. Hi, Matt. As I always say, I don't own the music that is playing in the background, which is, so, anybody knows me well enough knows I'm a huge anime fan, and this comes from Saint Seiya, also known as, in the West, Knights of the Zodiac. It's an amazing anime. And this is Sorrento Sirene. He's one of the warriors that, is very much active in the series. But before I start, if anybody can see, I was going to post about this later, but I got a new tattoo, and it's a cardinal's wing. And the reason why I got a cardinal's wing is because a cardinal has the meaning that it is a messenger from the afterlife. It's a messenger from heaven of a loved one checking in on you and making sure that you're okay and watching over you. And I dedicated this to my friends my friends and family and loved ones that I've lost during the pandemic, during these last 10 years of my adult life as I come to the end of my 20s, which I'm super excited because I don't think 30 is a death sentence. I think it's a beautiful next chapter in one's life, and I'm super excited. And I got this, which I'm going to be adding color at a later point, but it's just beautiful. Shout out to Pierre Negli. If you don't know who that is, Pierre Negli is an incredibly multifaceted artist. That is who he is. He is an artist who not only paints and sketches and tattoos, but he is an incredible designer of puppets and toys and clothes, and he's just multifaceted. He's amazing. Check out Lindsay Burke and Pierre Negli at the Yellow Springs Ink Art Collective. They just do amazing work. Like, Lindsay has done work on my hip, which I've shown here on Facebook and my Instagram with my chrysanthemum tattoo. And then this is my first tattoo from Pierre, and I'm very well pleased, and it's a blessing, and I'm just very happy for it. The tea that we are having tonight is 4th Chakra Tea, which, for those who know their metaphysical knowledge and whatnot, that would be Anahata, the heart chakra. So it's about love and forgiveness and patience, and has the essence of rose quartz, which I think is really cool because rose quartz is one of my favorite stones to wear, although I am wearing tiger's eye tonight. Hi, Chase. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Keisha. Deborah. A bunch of people are out here. Hi, Matt. All right. Now, as my tea cools, I'm going to take a drink of water to get started. Aw, love you too, Derek. Hi. Now, as I always say, I am unable to answer questions while I'm reading, so I will do my best to answer them in the interim, like while I'm on breaks or if I have to go use the restroom. But like I said, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. I will... excuse me. Oh, thought I had something on my lip. Anyway, I always post these videos when I'm able to, when Facebook isn't giving me grief, onto my YouTube channel. If you are not on Facebook, and if you have a friend who wants to watch these videos, I do make my videos public. I have to make the most recent video on here public because I was unable to transfer to YouTube. Yay, technology. But like I said, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You can watch them later, share them with your friends, do whatever you will. This is for those who enjoy good reading and something relaxing, because reading is not just fundamental, it is essential. It is important. It helps us build perspectives, learn about different cultures, learn about different worldviews, and broadens our horizons from near and far. It doesn't matter how old or young you are, you should always be reading, whether it's a book, a newspaper, a magazine, a comic, a graphic novel, a manga, novella. whatever it is, you should be reading because it's important, because it helps expand one's mind and vernacular, and just you're able to dive into so many worlds, and there's literally a subject matter for anything that you could think of in the world of literature. Anything you could possibly think of. Even as impossible as it may seem, it exists. Trust me. So, without further ado, we are going to continue to read The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is the 5th book in the chronological order of the Chronicles of Narnia. So last time we were here, Edmund, Lucy, Caspian, and Eustace and Reepicheep have been captured by these group of pirates that are slave traders, and they're, selling them into slavery, and it's, kind of a bit of a dismal situation. But Caspian gets bought out by one of the missing men that were sent away by his uncle Miraz long ago. So we're now at a point where they've devised a plan to try to do a bluff to make it seem like there's an army going to attack if they don't release those prisoners and those slaves. So we're going to see what happens. And I'm quite confident that it is going to be a very interesting journey. This whole journey is going to be a bit of a page turner, to say the least. Chapter 4. What Caspian Did There. Next morning, the Lord Bird called his guests early, and after breakfast he asked Caspian to order every man he had into full armor. And above all, he added, let everything be as trim and as scored as if it were the morning of the first battle in a great war between noble kings, with all the world looking on. This was done, and then in 3 boatloads, Caspian and his people and Bird, with a few of his, put out for Narrowhaven. The king's flag flew in the stern of his boat, and his trumpeter was with him. When they reached the jetty at Narrowhaven, Caspian found a considerable crowd assembled to meet them. This is what I sent word about last night, said Bird. They are all friends of mine and honest people. And as soon as Caspian stepped ashore, the crowd broke out into hurrahs and shouts of, Narnia! Narnia! Long live the king! At that same moment, and this was also due to Bird's messengers, bells began ringing from many parts of the town. Then Caspian caused his banner to be advanced and his trumpet to be blown, and every man drew his sword and set his face into a joyful sternness. And they marched up the street so that the street shook, and their armor shone so that one could hardly look at it steadily. At first, the only people who cheered were those who had been warned by Bird's messenger, and knew what was happening, and wanted it to happen. But then all the children joined in because they liked a procession and had seen very few. And then all the schoolboys joined in because they also liked processions and felt that the more noise and disturbance there was, the less likely they would be having to go to school this morning. Then all the old women put their heads out of doors and windows and began chattering and cheering because it was a king, and what is a governor compared with that? And all the young women joined in for the same reason, and also because Caspian and Drinian and the rest were so handsome. And then all the young men came to see what the young women were looking at, so that by the time Caspian reached the castle gates, nearly the whole town was shouting. And where Gumpus sat in the castle, muddling and messing about with accounts and forms and rules and regulations, he heard the noise. So there's the whole group proceeding as follows, giving a grand display. Yes! At the castle gate, Caspian's trumpeter blew a blast and cried, Opened for the king of Narnia, come to visit his trusty and well-beloved servant, the governor of the Lone Islands. In those days, everything in the islands was done in a solemnly slouchy manner. Only the little postern opened out came a tousled fellow with a dirty old hat on his head instead of a helmet, and a rusty old pike in his hand. He blinked at the flashing figures before him. Shazzy, he mumbled. No interviews without appointments, except between 9 and 10 p.m. Second Saturday every month. Uncover before Narnia, you dog, thundered the Lord Bird, and dealt him a rap with his gauntleted hand, which sent his hat flying from his head. What's it all about?" began the doorkeeper, but no one took any notice of him. Two of Caspian's men stepped through the postern and, after some struggling with bars and bolts, flung both wings of the gate wide open. Then the king and his followers strode into the courtyard. Here a number of the governor's guards were lounging about, and several more came tumbling out of various doorways. Though their armor was in a disgraceful condition, these were those fellows who might have fought if they had been led or had known what was happening. So this was the dangerous moment. Caspian gave them no time to think. "Where is the captain?" he asked. "I am more or less, if you know what I mean," said a languid and rather dandified young person without any armor at all. "It is our wish," said Caspian, "that our royal visitation to our realm of the Lone Islands should, if possible, be an occasion of joy, and not of terror to our loyal servants. If it were not for that, I should have something to say about the state of your men's armor and weapons. As it is, you are pardoned. Command a cask of wine to be opened, that your men may drink our health. But at noon tomorrow I wish to see them here at this courtyard looking like men-at-arms, and not like vagabonds. See to it on pain of our extreme displeasure." The captain gaped, but Byrne immediately cried, "Three cheers for the king!" said the soldiers, who had understood about the flask of wine, even though they had understood nothing else, joined in. Caspian then ordered most of his own men to remain in the courtyard. He, with Byrne and Drinian and 4 others, went into the hall. Behind a table at the far end with various secretaries about him sat his sufficiency, the governor Gumpus. Gumpus was a bilious-looking man with hair that had once been red and was now mostly gray. He glanced up at the strangers entered and then looked down at his papers, saying automatically, "No interviews without appointments except between 9 and 10 p.m. on second Saturdays." Caspian nodded to Byrne and then stood aside. Byrne and Drinian took a step forward and each seized one end of the table. They lifted it and flung it one side of the hall, where it rolled over, scattering a cascade of letters, dossiers, inkpots, pens, sealing wax, and documents. Then, not roughly, but as firmly as if their hands were pincers of steel, they plucked Gumpus out of his chair and deposited him facing it about 4 feet away. Caspian at once sat down in the chair and laid his naked sword across his knees. "My lord," said he, fixing his eyes on Gumpus, "you have not given us quite the welcome we expected. We are the king of Narnia." "Nothing about it in the correspondence," said the governor. "Nothing in the minutes. We have not been notified of any such thing. All irregular. Happy to consider any applications, and we are to inquire into your sufficiency's conduct of your office," continued Caspian. "There are 2 points especially on which I require an explanation. Firstly, I find no record that the tribute due from these islands to the crown of Narnia has been received for about 250 years. "That would be a question to raise at the council next month," said Gumpus. "If anyone moves that a commission of inquiry be set up to report on the financial history of the islands at the first meeting next year, why then—" "I also find it very clearly written in our laws," Caspian went on, "that if the tribute is not delivered, the whole debt has to be paid by the governor of the Lone Islands out of his private purse." At this, Gumpus began to pay real attention. "Oh, that's quite out of the question," he said. "It is an economic impossibility. Your Majesty must be joking." Instead, he was wondering if there were any way of getting rid of these unwelcome visitors. Had he known that Caspian had only one ship and one ship's company with him, he would have spoken soft words for the moment and hoped to have them all surrounded and killed during the night. But he had seen a ship of war sailing down the straits yesterday and seen it signaling, as he supposed, to its consorts. He had not then known it was the king's ship, for there was no wind enough to spread the flag out and made the golden lion visible. So he had waited further developments. Now he imagined that Caspian had a whole fleet at Burnstead. It would never have occurred to Gumpus that anyone would walk into Narrowhaven to take the islands with less than 50 men. It was certainly not at all the kind of thing he could imagine doing himself. "Secondly," said Caspian, "I want to know why you have permitted this abominable and unnatural traffic in slaves to grow up here, contrary to the ancient custom and usage of your dominions." necessary, unavoidable, said his sufficiency. An essential part of the economic development of the islands, I assure you. Our present burst of prosperity depends on it. What need you of slaves? For export, your majesty. Sell them to Calorman, most likely. And we have other markets. We are a great center of the trade. In other words, you don't need them. Tell me what purpose they serve except to put money into the pockets of such as Pug. Your majesty's tender years, said Gumpus, with what was meant to be a fatherly smile, hardly make it possible that you should understand the economic problem involved. I have statistics, I have graphs, I have tender as my years may be, said Caspian. I believe I understand the slave trade from within quite as well as your sufficiency. And I do not see that it brings into the islands meat, or bread, or beer, or wine, or timber, or cabbages, or books, or instruments of music, or horses, or armor, or anything else worth having. But whether it does or not, it must be stopped. But that would be putting the clock back, gasped the governor. Have you no idea of progress, of development? I have seen them both in an egg, said Caspian. We calling it going bad in Narnia. This trade must stop. I can take no responsibility for any such measure, said Gumpus. Very well, then. We relieve you of your office. My Lord Byrne, come here. And before Gumpus quite realized what was happening, Byrne was kneeling with his hands between the king's hands and taking the oath to govern the Lone Islands in accordance with the old customs, rights, and usages and laws of Narnia. And Caspian said, I think we've had enough of governors, and made Byrne a duke, the Duke of the Lone Islands. As for you, my lord, he said to Gumpus, I forgive you your debt for the tribute, but before noon tomorrow you and yours must be out of the castle, which is now the Duke's residence. Look here, this is all very well, said one of Gumpus's secretaries, but suppose all you gentlemen stop play-acting and we do a little business. The question before us really is... The question is, said the Duke, whether you and the rest of the rabble will leave without a flogging or with one. You may choose which you prefer. When all this had been pleasantly settled, Caspian ordered horses, of which there were a few in the castle, though very ill-groomed, and he, with Byrne and Drinian and a few others, rode out into the town and made for the slave market. It was a long, low building near the harbor, and the scene which they found going on inside was very much like any other auction. That is to say, there was a great crowd, and Pug, on a platform, was roaring out in a raucous voice, Now, gentlemen, lot 23, 5 Terabinthian agriculture laborer, suitable for the mines or the galleys, under 25 years of age, not a bad tooth in his head, good brawny fellow, take off his shirt, tax, and let the gentleman see. There's muscle for you. Look at the chest on him. 10 crescents from the gentleman in the corner. You must be joking, sir. 15, 18. 18 is bidden for lot 23. Any advance on 18? 21. Thank you, sir. 21 is bidden. But Pug stopped and gaped when he saw the mail-clad figures who had clanked up to the platform. On your knees, every man of you, to the King of Narnia, said the Duke. Everyone heard the horses jingling and stamping outside, and many had heard some rumor of the landing and the events at the castle. Most obeyed. Those who did not were pulled down by their neighbors. Some cheered. Your life is forfeit, Pug, for laying hands on our royal person yesterday, said Caspian. But your ignorance is pardoned. The slave trade was forbidden in all our dominions quarter of an hour ago. I declare every slave in this market free. He held up his hand to check the cheering of the slaves and went on. Where are my friends? The dear little gal and the nice young gentleman, said Pug with an ingratiating smile. Why, they were snapped up at once. We are here. We're here. Caspian, cried Lucy and Edmund together, and at your service, sire, piped Reepichee from another corner. They had all been sold, but the men who had bought them were staying to bid for other slaves, and so they had not yet been taken away. The crowd parted to let the three of them out, and there was great hand-clasping and greeting between them and Caspian. Two merchants of Calormen had once approached. The Calormen have dark faces and long beards. They wear flowing robes and orange-colored turbans, and they had a wise, wealthy, courteous, cruel, and ancient people. They bowed most politely to Caspian and paid him long compliments, all about the fountains of prosperity, irrigating the gardens of prudence and virtue, and things like that. But of course, what they wanted was the money they had paid. "That is only fair, sirs," said Caspian. "Every man who has bought a slave today must have his money back. Pug, bring out your takings to the last minimum." "Does your good majesty mean to beggar me?" whined Pug. "You have lived on broken hearts all your life. And if you are beggared, it is better to be a beggar than a slave. But where's my other friend?" "Oh, him. Oh, take him and welcome," said Pug. "Glad to have him off my hands. I've never seen such a drug in the market in all my born days. Priced him at 5 crescents in the end, and even so, nobody'd have him. Threw him in free with other lots, and still no one would have him. Wouldn't touch him, wouldn't look at him. Tax, bring out sulky." Thus Eustace was produced, and sulkily he certainly looked. For though no one would want to be sold as a slave, it is perhaps even more galling to be a sort of utility slave whom no one would buy. He walked up to Caspian and said, "See, as usual. Been enjoying yourself somewhere while the rest of us were prisoners. I suppose you haven't even found out about the British consul." "Of course not." That night they had a great feast in the castle of Narrowhaven, and then... "Tomorrow for the beginning of our real adventures," said Reepicheep when he had made his bows to everyone, and went to bed. But it could not really be tomorrow or anything like that. For now they were preparing to leave all known lands and seas behind them, and the fullest preparations had to be made. The Dawn Treader was emptied and drawn on land by 8 horses over rowers, and every bit of her was gone over by the most skilled shipwrights. Then she was launched again and victuallated and watered as full as she could hold. That is to say, for 28 days. Even this, as Edmund noticed with disappointment, only gave them a fortnight's eastward sailing before they had to abandon their quest. While all this was being done, Caspian missed no chance of questioning all the oldest sea captains whom he could find in Narrowhaven to learn if they had any knowledge or have any rumors of land further to the east. He poured out many a flagon of the castle ale to weather-beaten men with short grey beards and clear blue eyes, and many a tall yarn he heard in return. But those who seemed the most trustful could tell of no lands beyond the lone islands, and many thought that if you sailed too far east you would come into the surges of a sea without lands that swirled perpetually round the rim of the world. "And that, I reckon, is where your majesty's friend went to the bottom." The rest had only wild stories of islands inhabited by headless men, floating islands, waterspouts, and a fire that burned along the water. Only one, to Reepicheep's delight, said, "And beyond that, Aslan's country, but that's beyond the end of the world, and you can't get there." But when they questioned him, he could only say that he heard it from his father. Bird could only tell them he had seen his 6 companions sail away eastward, and that nothing had ever been heard of them again. He said this when he and Caspian were standing on the highest point of Avra, looking down on the eastern ocean. "I've often been up here of a morning," said the Duke, "and since the sun come up out of the sea, and sometimes it looked as if it were only a couple of miles away. And I've wondered about my friends and wondered what they really is beyond that horizon. Nothing, most likely. Yet I am always half ashamed that I stayed behind. But I wish your majesty wouldn't go. We may need your help here. This closing the slave market might make a new world. War with Calormen is what I foresee. My liege, think again." "I have my oath, my lord Duke," said Caspian. "And anyway, what could I say to Reepicheep?" So, I'm going to add some sweetener to my tea, and I'll be right back. Oh, I hope everybody's enjoyed the story. It's been quite a busy day for most people. including myself, but I enjoy the quietness of my home. It's quite relaxing. I'm very blessed and fortunate to be able to have my own place, take care of myself the best I can, and I have great friends and family to help me along, and I'm very grateful to that. Hi, Dory. Hi, sweetheart. All right. Got my Belle mug, because she's awesome. I want to get an Ariel mug and a Jasmine one. I'll probably find it online someday. Oh, wow. That's nice. I actually have to check and see if this is... hawthorn berry, hawthorn leaf, hyssop, lavender, jasmine flower. Okay. It doesn't... Okay, so it is an herbal tea, so... Yeah. Fun fact for those who don't know, herbal teas have 0 caffeine. Black teas have high amounts of caffeine. And green tea has a high amount of caffeine. I have black teas in my house, but only if I'm trying, like after this, I'm probably going to do some reading of my own. And I always drink a glass of black tea to get my energy up. Just a little, because I've been working. I've been up since 6 and got home at 3. Couldn't really take a nap. And yeah, just started this because I love you guys. I love all of you. I want you to be able to enjoy the quietness of the world. Because it's going to get better, y'all. We just have to be patient. We really have to be patient and be kind to each other. There is always a better way to talk to each other. I was thinking about that. Majeska! Hey, honey! How's it going? Like I was saying, there's always a better way for us to talk to each other. I know for those in Yellow Springs, specifically those in town, I know it can be really frustrating to see people from out of town come in not wearing masks, not wanting to follow policy. Rather than take the angry stance of frustration, be better, because they expect you to act that way. Be better than what they perceive you to be. Show them better than you could tell them. That you're going to be calm and just be polite. And if you're in a store and you don't feel comfortable doing it or you don't want to cause a fuss, just talk to the proprietor or whoever is working to say, hey, got an individual over here who's not wearing a mask or whose mask isn't completely on. Because I feel like either side of the issue, we can be good to each other and be civil with each other. There's nothing impossible about doing that. But enough of that dribble. Let's continue on. Ooh, this is about to get interesting. Further interesting, I should say. Chapter 5. The Storm and What Came of It. It was nearly 3 weeks after their landing that the Dawn Treader was towed out of Narrow Haven Harbor. Very solemn farewells had been spoken, and a great crowd had assembled to see her departure. There had been cheers and tears, too, when Caspian made his last speech to the Lone Islanders and parted from the Duke and his family. But as the ship, her purple sails still flapping idly, drew further from the shore, and the sound of Caspian's trumpet from the poop came fainter across the water, everyone became silent. Then she came into the wind. The sail swelled out, the tug cast off and began rowing back. The first real wave ran up behind the Dawn Treader's prow, and she was a live ship again. The men off duty went below. Drinian took the first watch on the poop, and she turned her head eastward round the south of Avra. The next few days were delightful. Lucy thought she was the most fortunate girl in the world as she woke each morning to see the reflection of the sunlit water dancing on the ceiling of her cabin and looked round on all the nice new things she had got in the Lone Islands. Sea boot and buskins and cloaks and jerkins and scarves. Then she would go on deck and take a look from the forecastle at a sea which was a brighter blue each morning and drank in an air that was a little warmer day by day. After that came breakfast, such as appetite as one only has at sea. She spent a good deal of time sitting at the little bench in the stern playing chess with Reepicheep. It was amusing to see him lifting the pieces which were far too big for him, with both paws and standing on tiptoes if he made a move near the center of the board. He was a good player, and when he remembered what he was doing, he usually won. But every now and then Lucy won because the mouse did something quite ridiculous, like sending a knight into the danger of a queen and castle combined. This happened because he had momentarily forgotten it was a game of chess, and was thinking of a real battle and making the knight do what he would certainly have done in its place. For his mind was full of forlorn hopes, death or glory charges, and last stands. But this pleasant time did not last. There came an evening when Lucy, gazing idly astern at the long furrow or wake they were leaving behind them, saw a great rack of clouds building itself up in the west with amazing speed. Then a gap was torn in it, and a yellow sunset poured through the gap. All the waves behind them seemed to take on unusual shapes, and the sea was a drab or yellowish color like dirty canvas. The air grew cold. The ship seemed to move uneasily as if she felt danger behind her. The sail would be flat and limp one minute and wildly full the next. While she was noting these things and wondering at a sinister change which had come over the very noise of the wind, Drinian cried, "All hands on deck!" In a moment everyone became frantically busy. The hatchets were battering down, the galley fire was put out, men were aloft to reef the sail. Before they had finished, the storm struck. It seemed to Lucy that a great volley in the sea opened just before their blows, and they rushed down into it, deeper down than she would have believed possible. A great grey hill of water, far higher than the mast, rushed to meet them. It looked certain death, but they were tossed to the top of it. Then the ship seemed to spin round. A cataract of water poured over the deck. The poop and forecastle were like little islands with a fierce sea between them. Up aloft the sailors were lying along the yard, desperately trying to get control of the sail. A broken rope stood out sideways in the wind, as straight and stiff as it were a poker. "Get below, ma'am," bawled Drinian, and Lucy, knowing that landsmen and landswomen are a nuisance to the crew, began to obey. It was not easy. The Dawn Treader was listing terribly to starboard, and the deck sloped like the roof of a house. She had to clamber round to the top of the ladder, holding on to the rail, and then stand by while two men climbed up and then get down it as best she could. It was well she was already holding on tight, for at the foot of the ladder another wave roared across the deck up to her shoulders. She was already almost wet through with spray and rain, but this was colder. Then she made a dash for the cabin door and got in and shut out for a moment the appalling sight of the speed with which they were rushing into the dark, but not, of course, the horrible confusions of creakings, groanings, snappings, clatterings, roarings, and boomings, which only sounded more alarming below than they had done on the poop. Which, by the way, kids, the poop is the deck. The poop deck, it's where they go and stand out and see everything. Just to clarify. Because somebody did tell me, like, somebody's kid was like, "Are they pooping on the deck?" No, darling, they're not pooping on the deck. It's just a place for them to stand and see the expanse of the ocean. And all next day and all the next it went on. It went on till one hardly even remember a time before it even began. And there was always had to be 3 men at the tiller, and it was much as 3 could do to keep it at a kind of course. And there always had to be men at the pump, and there was hardly any rest for anyone. And nothing could be, cooked, and nothing could be dried. And the one man was lost overboard, and they never saw him again. And they never saw the sun. When it was over, Eustace made the following entry in his diary. September 3rd. First day for ages when I've been able to write. We had been driven before a hurricane for 13 days and nights. I know that because I had kept a careful count, though all the others say it's only 12. Pleasant to be embarked on a dangerous voyage with people who can't even count right. I had a ghastly time up and down enormous waves, hour after hour. unusually wet to the skin and not even an attempt to give us proper meals. Needless to say, there's no wireless or even a rocket, so no chance of signaling anyone for help. It all proves what I kept on telling them, the madness of setting out in a rotten little tub like this. It would be bad enough even if one was with decent people instead of fiends in human form. Caspian and Edmund are simply brutal to me. The night we lost our mast, though I was not at all well, they forced me to come on deck and work as a slave. Lucy shoved her oar in by saying that Reepicheep was longing to go, only he was too small. I wonder she doesn't see that everything that little beast does is all for the sake of showing off. Even at her age, she ought to have that amount of sense. Today the beastly boat is level at last, and the sun's out, and we have all been jawing about what to do. We've had food enough, pretty beastly stuff, most of it, to last for 16 days. The real trouble is water. 2 casks seem to have got a leak knocked in them and are empty. On short rations, half a pint a day each, we've got enough for 12 days. If we could, of course, the sensible thing would be to turn west at once and make for the Lone Islands. But it took us 18 days to get where we are, running like mad, like a gale behind us. Even if we got an east wind, it might take us far longer to get back. And at present, there's no sign of an east wind. In fact, there's no wind at all. As for rowing back, it would take far too long, and Caspian says the men couldn't row on half a pint of water a day. Pretty sure this is wrong. I tried to explain that perspiration really cools people down, so the men would need less water if they were working. He didn't take any notice of this, which is always his way when he can't think of an answer. The others all voted for going on in the hope of finding land. I felt it my duty to point out that we didn't know there was any land ahead and tried to get them to see the dangers of wishful thinking. Instead of producing a better plan, they had the cheek to ask me what I proposed. So I just explained coolly and quietly that I had been kidnapped and brought away on this idiotic voyage without my consent, and it was hardly my business to get them out of their scrap. September 4. Still becalmed. Very short rations for dinner, and I got less than anyone. Caspian is very clever in helping in things I don't see. Lucy, for some reason, tried to make up to me by offering me some of hers. With that interfering prig, Edmund wouldn't let her. Pretty hot sun. Horribly thirsty. All evening. September 5th. Still becalmed. And very, very hot. Feeling rotten all day, and I'm sure I've got a temperature. Of course, they haven't the sense to keep a thermometer on board. September 6th. A horrible day. Woke up in the night knowing I was feverish and must have a drink of water. Any doctor would have said so. Heaven knows I'm the last person to try to gain the unfair advantage that I've never dreamed this water rationing would be meant to apply to a sick man. In fact, I would have woken the others up and asked for some, only I thought it would be selfish to wake them. Right, Eustace? Come on now. So I just got up and took my cup and tiptoed out of the black hole we slept in, taking great care not to disturb Caspian and Edmund, for they had been sleeping badly since the heat and the short water began. I always try to consider others whether they're nice to me or not. I got on all right into the big room, if you could call it a room, where the rowing benches and the luggage are. The thing of water is at the end. All was going beautifully, but before I drawed a cupful which should catch me but that little spy Reep. I tried to explain that I was going on deck for a breath of air, and he asked me why I had a cup. He made such a noise that the whole ship was roused. They treated me scandalously. I asked, as I think anyone would have, why Reepicheep was sneaking out about the water cask in the middle of the night. He said that he was too small to be of any use on deck. He did sentry over the water every night so that one man could go to sleep. Now comes the rotten unfairness. They all believed him. Can you believe it? I had to apologize, or the dangerous little brute would have had me with his sword, and then Caspian showed up in his true colors as a brutal tyrant, and said out loud for everyone to hear that anyone found stealing water in future would get 24. And I don't know what this meant to Edmund explained it to me. It comes in the sort of books those Pevensey kids read. After this cowardly threat, Caspian changed his tune and started being patronizing, said he was sorry for me and that everyone felt just as feverish as I did, and we must all make the best of it, etc., etc. Odious, stuck-up prig. Stayed in bed all day today. September 7. Little wind today, but still far from the west. Made a few miles eastward with part of the sail, set on what Drinnian calls the jury mast. That means the bowsprit set upright and tied to the stump of the real mast. Still terribly thirsty. September 8th. Excuse me. Still sailing east. I stay in my bunk all day now and see no one except Lucy till the two fiends come to bed. Lucy gives me a little of her water ration. She says girls don't get as thirsty as boys. I'd often thought this ought to be more generally known at sea. September 9th. Land in sight. A very high mountain, a long way off to the southeast. September 10th. The mountain is bigger and clearer, but still a long way off. Gulls again today for the first time since I don't know how long. September 11th. Caught some fish and had them for dinner. Dropped on anchor about 7 p.m. in 3 fathoms of water in a bay in this mountainous island. That idiot Caspian wouldn't let us go ashore because it was getting dark and he was afraid of savages and wild animals. Extra water ration tonight. What awaited them on this island was going to concern Eustace more than anyone else, but it cannot be told in his words because after September 11th he forgot about keeping his diary for a long time. When morning came with a low gray sky but very hot, the adventurers found they were in a bay encircled by such cliffs and crags that it was like a Norwegian fjord. In front of them, at the head of the bay, there was some level land heavily overgrown with trees that appeared to be cedars, through which a rapid stream came out. Beyond that was a steep ascent ending in a jagged ridge, and behind that a vague darkness of mountains, which ran into dull-colored clouds so that you could not see their tops. So this is where they have docked, and it looks pretty ominous, kids. Does not look like a place where people live. The near cliffs at each side of the bay were streaked here and there with lines of white, which everyone knew to be waterfalls, though at the distance they did not show any movement or make any noise. Indeed, the whole place was very silent, and the water of the bay as smooth as glass. It reflected every detail of the cliffs, the scene which they'd been pretty in a picture, but that was rather oppressive in real life. It was not a country that welcomed visitors. A whole ship's company went ashore in 2 boatloads, and everyone drank and washed deliciously in the river, and had a meal and a rest before Caspian sent 4 men back to keep the ship, and the day's work began. There was everything to be done. The casks must be brought ashore, and the faulty ones mended if possible and all refilled. A tree, a pine if they could get, must be felled and made into a new mast. Sails must be repaired, a hunting party organized to shoot any game the land might yield. Clothes to be washed and mended, and countless small breakages on board to be set right. For the drawn treader herself, and this was more obvious now than they saw her at a distance, could hardly be recognized as the same gallant ship which had left Narrowhaven. She looked a crippled, discolored hulk, which anyone might have taken for a wreck, and her officers and crew were now no better. Lean, paled, and red-eyed from lack of sleep, and dressed in rags. As Eustace lay under a tree and heard all these plans being discussed, his heart sank. Was there going to be no rest? It looked as if their first day on the longed-for land was going to be quite as hard work as a day at sea. Then a delightful idea occurred to him. Nobody was looking. They were all chattering about their ship as if they actually liked the beastly thing. Why shouldn't he simply slip away? He would take a stroll inland, find a cool, airy place up in the mountains, having a good long sleep, and not rejoin the others till the day's work was over. He felt it would do him good, but he would not take great care to keep the bay and the ship in sight so as to be sure of his way back. He wouldn't like to be left behind in this country. He at once put his plan into action. He rose quietly from his place and walked away among the trees, taking care to go slowly and in an aimless manner, so that he merely was stretching his legs. He was surprised to find how quickly the noise of conversation died away behind him, and how very silent and warm and dark green the wood became. Soon he felt he could venture on a quicker and more determined stride. This soon brought him out of the wood. and the ground began sloping steeply up in front of him. The grass was dry and slippery, but manageable if he used his hands as well as his feet, and though he patted and mopped his forehead a good deal, he plunged away steadily. This showed, by the way, that his new life, little as he suspected it, had already done him some good. The old Eustace, Harold and Alberta's Eustace, would have given up the climb after about 10 minutes. Slowly and with several rests, he reached the ridge. Here he expected to have a view of the heart of the island. But the clouds had now come lower and nearer, and a sea of fog was rolling to meet him. He sat down and looked back. He was now so high that the bay looked small beneath him, and the miles of sea were visible. Then the fog from the mountains closed in all around him, thick but not cold, and he lay down and turned this way and that to find the most comfortable position to enjoy himself. But he didn't enjoy himself, or not for very long. He began, almost for the first time in his life, to feel lonely. At first this feeling grew very gradually, and then he began to worry about the time. There was not the slightest sound. Suddenly it occurred to him that he might have been lying there for hours. Perhaps the others had gone. Perhaps they had let him wander away on purpose, simply in order to leave him behind. He leapt up in a panic and began the descent. At first he tried to do it too quickly, slipped on the steep grass and slid for several feet. But he thought this had carried him too far to the left, and as he came up he had seen precipices on that side. So he clambered up again, and as near as he could guess to the place he had started from, and began the descent afresh, bearing to his right. Well, my right, your left. He went very cautiously, for he could not see more than a yard ahead. There was still perfect silence all around him. It was very unpleasant to have to go cautiously when there was a voice inside you saying all the time, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." For every moment the terrible idea of being left behind grew stronger. If he had understood Caspian and the Pevenses at all, he would have known, of course, that there was not the least chance of their doing any such thing. But he had persuaded himself that they were all fiends in human form. At last, said Eustace as he came slithering down a slide of loose stones, and found himself on the level. And now, where are those trees? There is something dark ahead. Why, I do believe it's the fog clearing. It was. The light increased every moment and made him blink. The fog lifted. He was in an utterly unknown valley, and the sea was nowhere in sight. And that is where we will stop for tonight with our reading of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. First of all, this ship looks awesome. They don't make them like they used to, huh? Literally. Or not in the way that they did back then. In more medieval days in 17th century, 16th century, they don't make ships with mass in abundance like they used to. Most ships nowadays are electrically controlled or steam powered. Hydro-powered in some cases, where water floods through the system and gives it the energy to keep moving, which I think is really cool. But I thank you all for watching. I hope you all had a good time. I hope y'all have a wonderful day. Tomorrow is my favorite day of the week. And I will see y'all soon. See ya.